Okay, so on today's agenda, we're gonna look very briefly at what we learned last time. We're gonna go over some new concepts, which are user inputs and variables, and there's going to be a few programming examples of how these might be useful in the exercises. So just as a brief notification, like next week there are no classes due to the fact that I am not at work. I'm away next week. Because I'm away, the help also on Slack may be a bit limited, so just so you are aware. So that means that because we're having an off week next week, the next lecture when things return back to normal are going to be on September 21st. So it's just simply an off week. Apologies for that. I have a trip that I need to make, so cannot be there, and I'm gone for the whole week. But since we have plenty of time and there's only about 12 weeks worth of material on this course, we should still be able to finish well before Christmas. So, but this is just so you know, and I have updated this information on the course page in Learn as well, to say that next Monday there indeed is no meeting, so we will continue on this on the 21st. Okay, so on to this week's agenda. So, well, actually, let's begin by thinking what did we do last time. So we started with a program called Hello World. The program itself is fairly simple, arguably, but in order to get that far, we had to do a lot of small steps. We needed to install the programming environment. We needed to figure out what is the correct command to give to get those words to be printed out on the screen. So there's a great deal of small details that need to be achieved that are not necessarily visible to the naked eye. So just printing stuff on screen on itself, I know the program is not very complicated, but we have already achieved quite a lot of quite a lot in the context. So the actual takeaway from the lesson last week was how do we print data on the screen? Well, actually, because on this course we're mainly going to be working with text, so it's going to be how do you print text to the screen. And I think we should probably review a little bit what did we learn from the print command, and also something we didn't cover last time, what else is there to know about this humble print command. So if we just recap what we did last week, what we did was basically a program like this. I have now the editor window on the left and the interpreter window where the results come on the right. So what the Hello World did, once again, was basically print these two words to this output console. And if I run it by pressing F5, here you can see the outcome. Okay, that's where we left off last week. So basically we went through these following things. So to display text on the screen, we used the print command, and the text we wanted to display, that goes within the parentheses. So in Python, when there is a command, it's always followed by these parentheses. So this is going to be the same for all the commands that we use from here on until the end of the world, if you like. So this is never going to change. If you say parentheses, it means it's a command in Python. It will do something. We have only covered this one command, print, but in the future, all the other commands are going to work similarly. So there's the name for the command, and then there are parentheses following it. And because we wanted to get text out of our program, we needed to mark the text somehow to distinguish it from the commands that we want to give to the program. So text is always surrounded by quotation marks, and you can use the normal double quotation marks. You can use single quotation marks, or you could use these special triple quotation marks as well. What I think we didn't cover last time was that print could also be used with no text at all. So what happens if we just do a print command but leave everything inside the parentheses out? So we can try to do that. Let's modify this program to see what that looks like. So we have a print command, but I'm going to leave this portion here where the text would usually go empty. So what happens then if I go and run the program? Well, you might argue nothing happened, but indeed something did. So what happened here was gonna surround this printing command with something else as well, so you can see the difference better. So what happens here is that if we put no text inside the print command, it will make us an empty line here. So the point of this is that within these parentheses, it's optional to put something there. You don't have to put anything there, and if you don't, you end up with an empty line. Next point in the agenda, you can also put numbers inside the print statement, and the numbers do not need the quotation marks. And notice that the number could also be a mathematical operation, such as 2 plus 2. So if we see what that does, so let's modify this print now to maybe let's try a whole number first. And let's try the mathematical operation as well. So let's do 22 times 2. And these two statements should work the same. So the end result from these two should be perfectly identical. Although like 22 times 2 is not actually 42, it's 21 times 2. So if I was a bit better at math, that would have worked on the first try. Now I had to manually, well, luckily I noticed my mistake before trying to run the program. So if we indeed check, are these two the same? We can see that they are. So if we are putting numbers inside this print, you suddenly do not need the parentheses. Sorry, if we are putting numbers inside the parentheses here, we do not need the quotation marks. It will become apparent later on why I am making this point. Okay, let's leave it here and see what else is there. If I was to print a long piece of text, I can also split it inside the parentheses in the print. And this can be done using the comma or the plus sign. This will also be important later on. You may see at the beginning of this course and these lectures that I keep saying this will be important later on, and trust me, it will. We're going to look at things one at a time, in a very calm and collected manner, and then later on we're going to use those small little things to build bigger and fancier programs. But for now, let's just keep it to printing text. So anyway, let's try this in practice. So splitting text into smaller chunks using either comma or the plus sign. Okay, so let's look at the comma first. So I'm again gonna take my print command here, and let's again make a hello world program. I know this is going to be really tiresome at some point if we be, but I promise you we are not going to just be making hello world programs for the following 10 weeks. So we're gonna do hello and world, but this time I'm not going to be writing them within the single quote within the same quotation marks. I'm gonna be putting these words in quotations and splitting them with this comma. And now if we look at the output, so we run this code here, you can see it constructed the hello world message identically to the one we had last week. So how does this comma work then? Well, it turns out you can split messages within the print with the comma. So I can keep adding. Content. So let's do it like this. Let's say hello world from Python. So I can keep adding words and separate them with the comma, and the Python interpreter will now automatically join these words into one coherent sentence. Also notice that I have written within the quotation marks all of these words and there is not a single space in here. Yet when I print them, they are separated by a space. So this is more or less how this comma joins these words together. The comma will will add a space there automatically. The other way to do the same thing, I'm gonna go ahead and copy this line and just paste it just below. The other way to join words together was with the plus sign. So I'm just going to do that. So I'm going to replace the commas with a plus sign. Here we are. So now I'm saying, okay, this word hello plus the word world plus the word from plus the word Python. Now, this works more or less the same, except there is one small key difference. If I run this, and now you'll be able to see how this first command works and how this second command works, and you'll be able to see that there is a slight difference. If I run this, you'll see that the top line did what we saw earlier. It joins the words with a space in between, whereas the bottom one doesn't. So what the plus sign does, it adds these words together similarly to the comma, but it does not add a space. So if we wanted to put a space between these words, we have using the plus sign, we would have to add it to the end of each word, or alternatively the beginning of the next word. So adding the space like this would get us the same result as the first line. So this is the difference between joining these things, these words with the comma and with the plus sign. Now again, we're going to come into what this or how this works more in detail later, but this will be something that you're going to be needing in the exercises. If not this week, it's the following week. Finally, we could try mixing text and numbers. So let's try to copy these lines from my presentation to the code editor. So I'm just gonna get rid of these lines and copy what was here on the presentation. And actually, I'm gonna have to do that, and the next so that line says Oceans 11. The next line says 7 seas. Right. So as we learned before, you can join things within the print statement with the plus or the comma. So these two lines now should work. So what I want to do is just simply previously I was just joining text together. So now I want to join text and numbers, and we already saw that the print is able to handle numbers as well, and you don't need to put the quotes around the numbers, right? Makes sense so far. So let's try these examples and see if they work. Okay, so the result is not what we hope for. What we see there is in fact an error message. Not to do with this first line. So this first line we wanted to print Oceans and 11 together on the same line, and that's what we got out of it as well. This second line is more problematic. So it turns out if you want to mix numbers and text within the same print, that can be done using the comma, but it cannot be done using the plus sign. The reason why that is will become clear um, actually in the following lesson. But just for now, just remember that this will not work. So if I change the plus to a comma, and again the spacing between different things here does not matter. I could remove this space, or I can put two spaces in. The spaces here do not matter, and run this code, and suddenly it will work. So mixing numbers and text will work with the comma, will not work with the plus sign. Otherwise, the plus sign will join words together. It just will not add a space between them. Okay. So those are many interesting things about the print command that you can do. So as you can see, the print command is already fairly versatile. It can do a lot of stuff, and there's a lot to take in from these lessons. So there is a lot to do with just one command. However, as we need to move forward in life in general, and also to do more complex programs, we should probably be thinking, okay, so how would we interact with a computer program? So basically, so far, what's missing? If you think about any computer program, usually you as the user will have the ability to type something with using your keyboard. That's to say you have the ability to give some input. So if we were to use the web browser as an example, uh, the user will be able to type the website's URL to the address bar, and pressing the enter key will then make your browser load that web page. So how do we read inputs from the user in the Python language? So this is done with another command. It's going to be now the second command that we learn here. So input in Python is done with a command called input. So here we have a fairly simple example, 2 lines of code that demonstrate how the input command works. So we're just going to type that into our code editor and see how it works. So just going to get rid of all the old codes, and well, once again review what was this supposed to do. It's a program that will ask, hi there, who are you? And then it will, once you type your name into it, it will greet you by name. Okay. So we begin by with this line. So name equals input, and then inside input, a bit like we were doing inside the print, I'm gonna do the I am going to write the text that's prompted to the user. This is called a prompt, by the way, in technical terms. And the next line would be to greet the user using whatever name they have just put in there. So something like this. So before going into how this exactly works, let's see how it works, because I think it is easier to see how it works. It's just 2 lines of code, but it can be a bit complicated if we don't try it out. So let's run this piece of code. So remember, there's 2 lines of code here. So it should do two things. So if I run this program, we can see here on the bottom right that these 2 lines of code now translated into 1 line here on the console. So what's going on here is basically this input command will, at this point, wait for us to type something in. That's why it's called an input. So we, as the user, we now have to interact with this program. Input means we're expecting input from whoever is sitting behind the keyboard. So if I answer this question, what's your name? The last time I checked, my name was Timo. I think I could check it, but I don't have my driver's license with me. Okay, and I mentioned also that at the end of input, we're supposed to press the enter key, right? So I'm just going to press enter at this point, and then we get a personalized greeting. And of course, if I run this again, and this time if I am suffering from from split personalities, and I decide to use my evil alter ego's name instead, we get a different response. So basically what's going on here is with input we can capture something that the user is typing, and later on we are printing it out by using something called a variable. So how this exactly works, in this section, this name in our code, name equals input something. This means roughly after this line, we can use name as a special word in our program code to mean whatever it was that the user typed in. So as I quickly mentioned already, this special word in our code, it's called name right here. This special word name is what is called a variable. Now the name variable comes from the fact that each whatever is inside that variable name, it can vary. So we saw it here in the example already. So if I use my first name here, you can see that the program captures it perfectly. If I type something else here, again, it's different, but yet the program somehow catches it. So what's going on here is that we're actually typing something in. That's something, that word, this name, goes into the computer's memory, and later on, because we have assigned this special word, this variable, to whatever we typed in, we are able to access it. So the basic idea here is that indeed the variable's content can vary. So the code is always the same. What the user types in is different, and therefore the output can be different as well. So this brings us to the actual concept of a variable. The variable can hold all kinds of data, and we've also already seen the types of data that you can have. You can basically have either text or numbers. Now, what's important to remember here is that even though I started off showing how the input command works, input is not needed in order to create a variable. Now, input just happens to be something that requires a variable in order to get something sensible out of the program, and it's an easy way to introduce ourselves to this topic, but it's in fact not needed. We can create variables in the program code as well. So in order to demonstrate this, let's think of a real use case where a variable might be useful. So let's imagine we have a program. Maybe it's used by a travel agency on their website. A program that greets people in many languages. Now, I'm going to be using my language abilities to the fullest in this one. So let's start with an English greeting. Notice I'm separating these two words that I want to use in my program code with an underscore. There's a good reason for it. Variable names in Python cannot contain spaces, so the variable name should be one word. So how I create a variable is basically I say, okay, we have a variable name. In this case, it's our greeting English, which is going to denote our greeting in the English language. And after that, I'm going to use the equal sign. So greeting English equals something. And then I'm going to put in the text. So that's going to be, I believe, good morning. My next variable would be the greeting in Spanish. I don't have a Spanish keyboard, so I cannot do the accent on top of the I. Apologies to any Spanish speaker for this. And let's create a third one in my native language, which is Finnish. Okay, so now we have here a series of variables. So I have typed in some text, but instead of putting this text inside a print command, I have instead placed them inside variables. So now the way to access this data inside the variables, the next time if I wanted this program to print something, I of course need this print command, but instead of typing whatever is in here using the quotation marks inside the parentheses like this, I can also just put the variable name inside the inside the parentheses. Now if I run this program, we can see the outcome here. The program greets us in English saying good morning. Notice, however, that because I only printed this English greeting, the following lines of text, buenos dias and hyvää huomenta, were not captured by this program. So there is more data within this program. There is more text than what is actually printed here in the console here on the right. And of course, this is not a problem now that we talked about what the print can do and how to join things using the comma. So I'll complete the program basically by putting all these greetings inside this print statement. Okay, separated by commas. And now if I run the program, we should get all three. And indeed we do. If we were to continue with the line with the greeting, the personalized greeting program that we had earlier, we could use the input as well. So I'm gonna use name again. To create this prompt. So much like in these first three cases, I am constructing this variable the same way. So I'm saying name equals something. Much like in here, it says greeting English equals something. So in this case, I'm simply substituting this line of text with this input command. And to finish off this program, just going to, there we are, just going to print whatever that name was again. So I will save the code and run it once. Right, so I'm getting these three greetings here because they are inside this print statement here. First the English one, then the Spanish, then the Finnish one. As you can see, good morning, buenos dias, hyvää huomenta. Then we have this input command that asks you what's your name. I can of course reply with my first name, and if I press enter, it's going to greet me using this predetermined greeting. Okay, so there is a question in the chat, is like, how does Python know which variable is text? So and is whatever is the variable's data type defined by whatever you put in there? The quick answer to that is yes. So Python, unlike some other languages, is not strongly typed. So you can change data types on the fly. So that basically means if you put in text into a variable, the data type of that variable is then going to be text or string of text. If you put in a number, the data type is going to be a number. What Python doesn't do, it doesn't work like JavaScript where it starts guessing what the data type is if you get it wrong. So you cannot simply put in some garbage and let the Python interpreter guess what the data type should be. It will then throw an error. So, but it is fairly lenient, and there are also you can also define data types in later versions. So Python version 3.7 and upwards have something called type hints. All of this, however, is goes way beyond the data types do not go beyond the scope of the course, but type hints definitely do go beyond the scope. But that is the answer to that question. So whatever it is that you put in the variable, that becomes the variable state data type, and you do not have to specifically introduce the variable's data type before use. Okay, so we just learned something about variables. So you saw me using an underscore in place of a space. Now that's because you can basically form variables names using these 4 or 5 simple rules. So the variable name must start with a letter or an underscore. So you cannot start a variable name using a number. The rest of the letters can be either capital or lowercase letters, or numbers, or underscores, or other special characters. Python really is not that picky about how you construct a variable unless you wanted it to begin with a number. So number as the first letter in a variable name is a bad thing. Variable names are case sensitive, meaning that lowercase variable and uppercase variable are two different things. So this rule set of basically gives us a few working variable names that would work. If I demonstrate some of these in the interpreter here, I could call a variable simply a and assign a value. That works. I could call it ABC 1, 2, 3. That works as well. Also, any combination of letters, underscores, and even some special characters might work, except when it comes to for example, the exclamation mark. So also what you cannot do is, as said, you cannot start the variable name with a number. That will also give you an error. Right, so that's just the next example of how to name the variables. So I just typed them into the interpreter. I didn't type them into the into the code editor because, I mean, again, you can use the interpreter window here to also you can use Python commands in the command window as well. So this was just to demonstrate what the different kinds of good and bad variable names might be like. Okay, the last rule for how to make a good variable name is the name should describe the kind of data it contains. Well, this is a rule that you can obviously break. It's more to do with good coding style. So if I try to think of something on the go, let's say we had a variable called pi, and we put its value to 3.14. That sort of makes sense. The mathematical constant pi, or maybe I should call it pi, or even pi with all caps. All of this does the same thing. What you probably don't want to do is just call something like something a variable, because that doesn't really tell you what it is. Instead, probably you would want to do something like first name equals a person's first name, or place of birth might be the name of a town, and so on. So the reasoning behind this is that whatever you're typing into the code should more or less match what's going to be inside this variable, what the actual value might be. Now, and remember, because these variables, the content of the variable can change, because indeed they do vary. Place of birth maybe Helsinki, maybe Finland, maybe Australia, maybe New Zealand, Brazil, Uruguay, who knows? So in that um, sense, it makes sense to name this variable in a way that it gives us a hint of what it contains. So that's why, for example, you might at first want to call a variable x, but if x doesn't signify anything meaningful to you, then that's probably not a very good variable name. So perhaps to conclude, we should probably use everything that we've learned so far, and so basically what we can do is we can ask the user for input and then do something with those inputs. So let's do a simple application. Let's do a very simple calculator. Well, a calculator that knows how to add numbers together. As we go further along this course, we might add more functionality, but let's just do a really simple calculator that adds numbers together. So I've written the layout here, so it's more like so what we need to do is ask the user to type in two numbers. I'm going to call them number 1 and number 2. And then I'm simply going to say, okay, the sum of those two numbers is going to be number 1 plus number 2. Because if you remember, with input, we can ask the user to type in something. And if we ask them to type in numbers, we're going to get numbers. And inside of print, it's perfectly reasonable to do mathematics as well. We could add these up together outside of the print, it doesn't matter. And all in all, this should work. I mean, like number 1 plus number 2 is going to be, it's going to add up the number. So let's write that down. We are okay. So we have a calculator app. Well, let's put calculator in quotes. So we need one number at least. That's going to be put number, another number that we're gonna ask the same way. Give the second number, and then we're just simply going to actually let's do this in 2 lines. So let's do print the sum of your numbers is, and then I'm just gonna, let's do this in 2 lines. So I'm gonna, just for clarity's sake, so I'm gonna do the number 1 plus number 2 here inside this last print command. Okay, so to sum up, this first line will ask us for input. It will ask us to type something in. It should prompt us with this text, give the first number. The second line should do exactly the same, except it should prompt us with give the second number. Then there's a line that says just simply the sum of your numbers is, and colon, and then the last line should print the sum of those numbers, because number 1 plus number 2, that's the sum of those numbers. Right? So let's try it out. Okay, let's give the first number. Should we go high or low? Let's do like 5 plus 5 and expect the result to be 10. So first number is going to be 5, second number is going to be 5, and we press enter, and it says the sum of your numbers is 55. Right, so that's not exactly according to what we planned, was it? I mean, like like we did here number 1 plus number 2, so 5 plus 5. Well, that should be 10 and not 55. So something's obviously gone wrong. What if we run it once more? Let's just do 12 and 7, and we end up with 127. So the reason this doesn't work, or well, it does work, it's just doing the wrong thing. So we have to come back to what those different types of numbers, different types of things you can put inside a variable could be. So as we have seen previously, there's a few different type of numbers, and then there's also text. So as examples of numbers, I have here like 42, 54,321, or -1 are what are called whole numbers or integer numbers. 3.23 or 52.3 times 10 to the -4th are floating point numbers. And then there's something called complex numbers, which we're probably not going to be using that often, but they're going to be something like, for example, -5 plus 4j or 2.3 minus 4.6j. Well, anyway, more or less there's numbers, there's whole numbers and decimal numbers, and then there is also text. And if you remember, the text in the code needed to be placed within quotation marks. But if you wanted to print just the number didn't need to be within quotation marks. Now, that's having to do with data types. So basically, when you ask for user input with the input command, you're reading data from the keyboard. And now, of course, the Python interpreter doesn't know what you are going to type in. It just knows that you're reading something from the keyboard. And depending a bit on where you live and what language settings you have, your keyboard might be different than mine, but most keyboards have both number keys and letter keys. So you can write either words in there or you could type numbers. So input itself has no way of predicting whether whatever you typed in is actually text or if it's a number. So therefore, what input does, it presumes that everything that's coming in is text. And that is the explanation of how this works. So when we said, okay, we wanted to have number 1 plus number 2 in the code. Now remember, the first demo that I showed was if you were to split things inside the print command, you could do that with two ways. You could either do it with the comma or you could do it with the plus sign. So here the thing is, this program does not know that number 1 and number 2 are these variable names, that they should contain numbers. What it's doing right now, it's presuming that both number 1 and number 2 are in fact text. And when you put text together with the plus sign, the thing to do is to join them together. Now, this obviously wouldn't work if it was any other mathematical operation other than the plus. So let's say we were doing the product and we tried to do we tried to multiply them together. If we try this again, 12 times 7, it's just going to throw you an error. So it turns out the plus is a somewhat special character here, in that depending on if we are working with numbers or if you're working with text, it can mean different things. Now, how should we then go about fixing this problem? How do we make our calculator work? Now, in order to do that, we have to tell that in the code. And the technical term for doing this is changing the data type, or yeah, actually it's called typecasting, but for us, changing the data type is equally valid. So in order to do that, we need to know a couple of commands that do this sort of changing the data type. So the relevant ones are listed here. So there is a command called int, which converts text to a whole number. There is a command called float, which converts text to a floating point number or a decimal number. And there is a command called str, which converts a number back to text. So as we are in our calculator app just concerned about whole numbers, probably. Let's convert, let's use the int command to convert our input into integer numbers, into whole numbers. So again, so the way to do this, well, there are actually multiple ways of doing this. So remember that number 1 and number 2 here are right now they are text. So what you could do is you could wrap this variable name number 1 inside the int command like this. And if I do the same for the second number, right this, and you can do this all inside the print. So so what this is saying basically is convert number 1 into an integer, and then take number 2, convert it to an integer number, and only then sum them up. If I try to run this now, well, let's see if it works. So let's do 13 plus 7, and we get an actually relevant calculation here. So now the result is correct. Obviously, I said this can be done in many ways, so I don't necessarily have to place that int command inside this print command. So I could also do something like, okay, we have the first number, let's call it n1. Again, naming something n1 is a slightly bad style, but let's persevere so far. So that's going to be the integer version from number 1, and do the same for number 2. So I'm going to call that n2, and that's the integer version of number 2. And then I could either do it here, n1 plus n2. This should work. We try with 14 and 6. Sum should be 20. Alternatively, I could, of course, try to do the sum already here. Because I went overly short with these variable names first, I'm going to go overly verbose. So I'm going to say sum of the numbers. It's going to be n1 plus n2. This should work as well. So 15, 5 is still 20. Okay. What I'm trying to show here is that you can use as many variables as you like. And or you could use as little variables as you like. One of the ways we could do the same thing is I can also reuse these variable names. So I can, like, slightly paradoxically say number 1 equals the integer version of number 1, and the same with number 2 equals the integer version of number 2. So it actually turns out that if you want to reuse variable names, you can do this. So when the computer reads this line of code, it's actually reading it from right to left. So it's first going to see what is this variable called number 2. Then it's going to do ask, like, okay, so what does the integer command do with number 2? And whatever is the result of this operation, it's going to store it in whatever it is that we decided to call it here on the left-hand side of this equal sign. And because of this, I can put the same variable name, number 2, here on the left side of this assignment and on the right side here. And this way I could again inside this print here just do number 1 plus number 2, and the program should still work. One of the last things, the less practical way. Okay, this is all practical for the first few times that we do this. We could also, I began with putting the int command around these variables here. But I can also put the int command around the whole input command here. This is also a perfectly valid way of doing the same thing. Should still work. So depending on what kind of style you prefer, you can do the same thing many times. One of the things to remember, though, now if we needed the let's delete this line here. We leave this empty. Now if we want to calculate the sum of the numbers, so when we're actually doing the calculation, what we need to do now is figure out if our variables are already numbers, or are they still text. So since we have done this type conversion already here, all we have to say is the sum of the numbers equals number 1 plus number 2. And here within this print statement, I can just reuse this variable name here. And the thing is, if one of these variables here was not a number, then we'd be in trouble. So I'm just going to remove the integer operation around one of these. And so number 1 is now converted to a number using this int command. Number 2 is not converted. So number 2 is just going to be text now. So what we're going to try to do is sum up number 1, which is a number, and number 2, which is not a number. See what happens. Yeah, because of this disparity in these different things, for the Python interpreter, it doesn't make sense to try and add together a number with some text. So it's going to throw an error message. So if you do this, or more like when you do this, be careful and be very careful when doing it, so that you know that you have actually done the integer conversion correctly and into correct place. So if this was what we started with, probably what would make sense is, instead of wrapping the int command around this whole input line and this other input line, we probably might also do it like this. So putting this int command, because we're not using these numbers for anything else except just calculating the sum of those. So we might put the integer conversion here where we are actually calculating something. And this would work equally well. So again, slightly different methods of doing the same thing. And I hope none of them are too difficult to pull off. But it just shows you there are more than one solution to one single problem. And given that this little program is just 5 lines of code, and there is about 10 different ways of doing it. What is salient about this is more or less if and when you are asking for input from the user, whatever they type is going to be is going to be treated as if it was text until you do this type conversion. And with these whole numbers, integer numbers, it's going to be done with this int command. If you wanted, if we wanted, we could use float instead. That would mean we could also, if we could also use decimal numbers in the input, and our output works as well. I will leave it as homework to everybody to figure out what would happen if we use decimal numbers here in the when typing numbers in, but didn't use float instead of int here in the type conversion. Right. That should more or less cover the important things. Oh, there is one more type conversion that we did not look at. So str converts a number back to text. Could you think of a reason to do this? Well, let's put it this way. I'll just bring up the interpreter here once more and just give a live demo. So if you remember, once more, you can join pieces of text using this plus sign. So hello plus world is going to come out as hello world. But the same doesn't work if you had numbers and pieces of text. That's just going to throw a screen full of red text. So for this, if you were to do this for a reason, let's say it wasn't just one number typed here, maybe it was the result of a really complicated calculation, maybe it's the result of the calculator app here. So if we wanted to join a number with this piece of text, we can use the str command. We wrap a number, we wrap the str command around this number, and what this will do, it turns this number one here, it turns it back into text, and now suddenly this operation when joining these two things together, it's going to work because, well, the str command will convert this number into text, and then we have two pieces of text that the plus sign will join together, like so. Okay, yeah, so like that, we have reached the end of the slideshow. I'm not gonna go through the exercises right now because we're a bit short of time. but they should be well doable using the techniques presented here right now. So what I'm going to do next is turn off the recording, and I am also going to after that stay here for a little bit in the chat or also with my headphones on in case there are any questions. But this concludes the formal section, and if there is nothing else, look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks time. Not next week because I'm away, but in 2 weeks time. So just turning off the recording now.